Yo, welcome to another episode of Weird Growth, the podcast where we hear about the strange and often unpredictable journey that founders take. This episode, we have Steve Grace, who is the CEO and founder of Nudge Group. Nudge Group helps fast-growing startups and scale-ups find talent, offering a bespoke and flexible pricing model to suit the needs of your company. Since 2019, they've experienced some rapid growth, and Steve is here to tell us all about it today. Welcome, Steve. Thanks so much for being on Weird Growth today.
Thank you. And I thought the weird growth was about the weird founders rather than the growth journey. There you go. Well, I may not be the right guest then, I thought.
Well, mate, I think you're going to tick both boxes because we've got some interesting things to talk about, but really what it's about, what weird growth is, that there's this unpredictable thing, like an inflection point, which happens at some point in a business's journey, and you just don't know what it's going to be or where it's going to come from. But as long as you're on the journey, it'll eventually happen, I suppose. So that's what the podcast is about.
Couldn't agree. Look, I think we've had a few, what do they call, manufactured serendipitous moments throughout our journey that I could never have predicted. So happy to share all those with you.
Love it. Yeah, we're looking forward to getting stuck in. But before we do, please, could you just introduce yourself, or how do you introduce yourself to people, and how have you come to do what you do?
How do I introduce myself? I usually just run with Steve. Look, I think we've got a really interesting story. You know, you talked about Nudge, and Nudge is the main business, and it's essentially a recruitment company that was built for startups, but it's turned into something so much more that I could never have envisaged through acquisitions of other businesses. And now, bizarrely, 3 years in, we're this global company that speak to 5 to 10 founders a week and help them take their companies to unicorns in so many weird and wonderful and different ways. And it's not something you would have ever thought, oh, that's a great idea. And it's not something you would have ever predicted. It's evolved, and it continues to evolve. And I think that's what I like the most about it.
Yeah, I love that. Like, especially our business is very similar. You know, we niche down into that startup space, and it's just so fascinating to work with passionate founders and be a small part of that journey on helping them do what they do best. So it's really cool to meet someone else who's doing that to help as well.
Don't you find this space almost creates unusual things? Like, I think everyone's so collaborative, and I mean that genuinely collaborative rather than just lip service collaborative. Right. But everyone's so open-minded, and people just throw ideas around because that's the world you're in. And because of that, the strangest things happen. I think that's when you would have experienced that as well. I think that's what I love the most about it.
Yeah, and it's so much more interesting to be helpful and, you know, do what you can to be a part of or assist people who are also on that journey than in other industries where it can be quite competitive. Before we do get stuck into your story, Steve, I have a pop quiz for you, which we ask all guests on Weird Growth, and that is, if you were to start a new business from scratch today, what would it be?
It would be a product business. I've spent my life building services businesses, and I have this dream of starting a product business because I think from a scaling point of view, it's probably harder, but it's cheaper in the long run. You know, I think it's hard to scale services businesses, and I've always done that. And we've kind of got a mini product business at the moment, but yeah, that would be my advice to anyone. I think it would be product. And in what space? Oh gosh, that's a really interesting. It would have to be something to do with meta universes, wouldn't it? It would just have to be.
It's all the rage in 2022, something meta.
Yeah. Yes.
When you say it's hard to scale services businesses, what do you mean by that?
Well, I guess services businesses traditionally are selling time for money. You know, that's essentially what you're doing. And there are ways of making that better, and there are ways of scaling that more efficiently. Whereas a product business, once you've got your product, and it obviously takes a lot longer to get there. You know, service business up and running, bang, off, you're making money pretty quickly, right. Relatively low investment, that's fantastic. Product takes time, takes money, but once you get there, you can scale it without too much additional cost, and you can scale it beyond your wildest dreams, which is very difficult to do in services.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing about if you've got essentially, if it's software, for example, a software product, you know, for every additional unit you sell, you're not increasing your costs per se, and you get to focus on doing things like just marketing or just improving the product rather than the day-to-day ongoing operations.
Yeah, there's less people involved. And obviously being in the people business, I love people, but people are complex and people are far more complicated than software, I believe. So the more people you have, the more complicated it gets, whereas the more software you have, technically should get a little bit simpler.
Mate, friends that I have that run larger marketing agencies, with sort of 30 to 50 kind of head, they basically say, well, once you get to that point, you become, you're no longer really running an agency, you're just a glorified HR manager.
You are.
And your days are just filled with dealing with people.
And I actually quite enjoy that, and I enjoy the people side of it. I like the people management, but yeah, I think if you're in a product business, you can, as the business grows, you can either decide to go down that CEO route, and I'm reading an amazing book about that I might talk about later actually. But if you don't want to, you can go down, I'm going to get a CEO, or I'm going to get a help, and I'm going to focus on product because I like product, or I'm going to focus on marketing because I'm marketing. I think in services, you tend to have to be that people person. The founder is almost always going to be the CEO. It's very difficult to have a non-founding CEO in services.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. Great stuff. Thanks, Steve. What is the problem you're solving with Nudge then? You sort of alluded to it earlier. But
I think when we started, when I sold my last recruitment company, I sat around for 6 months and I was trying to work out, okay, what am I going to do? I don't want to do recruitment. I'm done with recruitment. What do I want to do? And then after some time, and I had about 6 months off, so I had some time, I came up with the fact that all the other ideas I'd come up with, which we won't go into because some of them were just utterly ridiculous, I didn't know what I was doing, and I knew how to do recruitment. But I thought, how can I make it enjoyable? And then I thought, well, startups have a really bad relationship with recruiters, and recruiters have a really bad relationship with starters, and no one particularly likes each other, and no one does a particularly good job of dealing with each other. Maybe we should solve that problem. So that was the initial problem that we solved and came up with, and we changed the structure and the way that we worked and the pricing and the education of consultants and all that sort of stuff. But I think now the bigger problem we have is helping, particularly I think where we add the most value. And our tagline is startup to unicorn. But I think where we add the most value is seed to Series A. I think that space is so difficult from a founder's perspective in terms of how do I get funding? Where do I get funding? What's the right kind of funding? Do I take loans? Do I take debt equity? Do I take revenue kind of focused funding, or do I go hit a VC, or do I hit, all those questions? And then it's who do I hire? How many do I hire? How quickly do I? All those questions. And there's not really a clear path for them to find that information out, and there's not really a clear path for them to get their products out. If you read most of the media, and not just mainstream media, but things like Startup Daily or Smart Company, there's a lot of focus on the companies that we know that are raising 20 million, 40 million, 60 million, 100 million, Series B, Series C, Series D. There's not a lot of talk about the guys that are trying to do their first pre-seed round and seed rounds. So it's become now trying to be a champion for them in everything that they do. We still charge for the recruitment, and the recruitment is what we're known for, but we have so much added value that we don't charge for, because in my view, if we help them succeed, they're going to hire a lot of people. So there's vested interest in there, so you wouldn't just do it for the sake of it, but it's also you're genuinely helping these people because you've got the contacts, you've seen it before and you're seeing it every day. So I think that's the problem we're solving now, is helping people get from pre-seed to Series A.
Yeah, no, I get asked the question a lot. Why would you focus your business on startups? Don't they have no money? And it's
I get that too.
Yeah, and the reality is actually, a lot of them from early on do actually have cash flow for a start if they've got a good business. Secondly, they might have raised money, or they're bootstrapping, from the founder's sort of savings or whatever. But the great thing is that if you can be on that journey to success with them, then you've, for a long-term partnership point of view, you've potentially got a client for life who's going to be super successful from both
absolutely right.
sides of the ledger.
We take equity sometimes with super early ones. Then you've really got a client for life because you've sort of come into the journey. But I think also, and I see this probably more from a selfish side in some respects, when you help someone like that build their dream business, the rewards are insane. In what you see in them and what you see them achieve. And I liken it kind of to, and this sounds terrible, but it is a weird podcast, so this will work. I liken it kind of to having children. You see your children grow up, it's incredibly rewarding. There's a similarity to that And it's not just about all helping them. It's kind of likening to giving to a charity, all sorts of other things. There are rewards coming both sides, even though you're doing a good thing.
Yeah, bang on. And the emotional journey that a lot of founders go on too, there's a lot of self-doubt and, am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right track? There's not very many people who kind of get it, what you're going through. Maybe not even your spouse or the people that are closest to you are really understand, what you're trying to achieve. And so when you have someone on your side who can relate and can be a genuine kind of partner and can help you through those tough times, it's a massive comfort, I think.
It's an interesting thing you said. I hadn't actually thought about that, but your spouse is probably the least likely person to understand, unfortunately. And I think for two reasons. One, well, they're not doing it, so it's very hard to understand it. But two, most founders are really bad at articulating it as well, and they tend to bottle it all in, and they don't want to necessarily talk. There's a lot of struggles in early stage startup. It's really, really hard. And I don't think a lot of people want to admit that to their spouse. They also don't want to worry their spouse that this thing they've just remortgaged the house on might not work. So there's a lot of keeping secrets, not in a bad way, but in just a not comfortable talking about it way. And I think there's not a lot of people to talk to.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, that's great that you've recognised that and you're doing what you can to help. How did you reach your very first customers with Nudge? You said you were sort of from a recruitment business previously. Was it a flow-on from that, or how did you get into
to a degree, it was pretty easy. We dealt with, my previous companies had relationships with startups. Sydney's not a big place. I've been living here for 20 years. When I moved over from London, I knew founders. It doesn't take much. And I think more than anything, there's such an enormous need for someone to address that problem. There were so many startups that were getting hit up by recruiters, particularly every time they did a funding raise that was in the press, but not coming to them with anything different. And because we'd spent all that time revamping the product, and it is quite different, and it was so specifically designed for them, and it's so obviously designed for them, that I think it wasn't difficult. And we didn't do. It's interesting when you think about that. We didn't do a lot of sales. We really have grown this business entirely through word of mouth and content marketing. Mm-hmm. And if I knew about content marketing, my two previous businesses, my life would have been a lot simpler. But I just sort of began to learn about it during my time off, and we started with that. And we didn't have particularly lofty targets. I was really building a lifestyle business at the beginning. That's kind of changed now. But so there wasn't great demands or pressures on me to perform. So I think I kind of just sort of floated into it. I know that sounds a bit
not at all.
when
you tap into a rich vein of demand where there is a genuine need for what you're doing, and you've created a great service, then things do seem to just happen a little bit easier when it comes to sales and growth. I'm so glad you raised content marketing. Can you tell us about that? What was it about content that made it obvious for you, and what do you really mean by when you say content marketing?
I think, what do I mean by content marketing? I think I started out by saying, okay, well, I really want to have an online presence because I felt that nearly all the companies that we would be marketing to were very much online tech businesses. So I thought, well, we need to be online. So this isn't the kind of company where you do cold calling and ring up founders. They don't want to talk to you. They're flat out, and as if you're going to be able to get hold of them anyway. Yep. So what you need to do is you need to make them aware that you exist because there's an obvious need. So by content marketing, initially it started out really, really basic. I just started looking for articles that I felt were relevant and well written, and I started sharing them and commenting on them. So which is the minimum you can do. And I'm not a writer. In fact, I'm horrifically dyslexic. So that was about the maximum I could do. And that started to get some traction. And then I started to sort of write a bit more and get someone to proofread it. Yep. And then basically as we were getting work, we just started to promote that. Oh, we're working with this company. They've just done a fundraising. We've just helped them fire this person. So it was really, it was almost like a daily blog of what we were doing. And then it's grown from there. I mean, when you look at us now, we have a content team, we have the podcast and the TV show, we have another website and a publishing arm, we have training courses, we have books, we have, oh my gosh, it's exploded. And we produce a lot of our own content, but we also share a huge amount of our clients' content, which is part of the value add because our audience has grown incredibly quickly. We have an audience of about 60,000 people now after 3 years, which I find astounding. And then we have this website which we can come on to called Balance the Grind that we acquired. That has an audience of 120,000 people. So we've now got this massive audience that we can share content for our clients to help them grow. And then from there on in, everyone just starts sending you content. I think the world has become content crazy, right? Particularly in creating their own content.
What is it about that particular tactic of creating something which is useful or interesting that can make it even called a market, can even make it a marketing tactic, I suppose? Like, what is it?
Well, you're adding a value, aren't you? You're giving people... Look, in some respects, we were lucky that COVID came along when it did. So COVID came along 8 months after we launched, I suppose.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Now, you could have seen that as an absolute disaster, and there was a couple of moments where I did. But the reality was everyone was stuck at home and wanting to consume content. So suddenly our profile went through the roof. And at the very same time, most of the companies that we were talking to, SaaS-based organizations, cloud-based organizations, went through the roof because suddenly everybody couldn't go into the office. So they needed to move all their products or everything into the cloud, or they needed to find a product where they didn't need a server. And so the whole world sort of flipped on its head in our favor to some degree. And everybody got used to being online, and everybody got used to doing things over video. So suddenly our content everyone wanted to consume more content because there wasn't a lot else to do, and there's only a certain amount of Netflix you can do in a day. And yeah. I think that when you're consuming content, a lot of people can kid themselves they're working as opposed to when they're watching Netflix. So I think we got lucky. A bit of timing always helps, but in reality, I think people would only consume content that they find useful. So as long as you're producing something that's useful, it's an amazing marketing tactic, because not only do they learn about you, they see you as someone that's giving something that they want. And I think that changes the whole relationship that you have. You're not selling them something, you're giving them something.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing about content when you're creating it as well is you are positioning yourself as an expert in your field. And you're demonstrating to your audience that you know your stuff, even if it's either recycled or it's stuff which is already common knowledge or out there and publicly available. But it's the source and the medium that is sort of the message in a lot of ways. Do you find that that's where how that's working for you in the market?
I'm quite particular. I'm a neat person, put it that way, and I'm quite particular in what the content that we put out looks like and what it says. I think I have seen, and I was very particular about the content that I reshared. There's a lot of content out there. And I think if you're going to go down a content route, you're exactly right. You're positioning yourself as an expert. So you need to make sure what you're saying is actually right. It's almost the same sort of responsibility that a journalist might have. You can't just write anything and expect people to believe it, although arguably a lot of people do. If you're going to try and grow a business through content marketing, you need to make sure, one, it's accurate, two, it's valid, and three, it's of the right quality. And I also think look and feel is super important. I really do. I think that, filming some events in certain situations doesn't look great. I'm not a big fan of the walking down the street stuff. I know that really works well for some people, but that was the style that we decided to take. We wanted to come across as quite high quality content, very much like this show, because I think that adds a level of expertise to it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a lot of takeaways and messages that people kind of subliminally absorb just from the way things are presented. It's not even necessarily about the content per se. Super important point. Thanks, Steve. Incredible that you have an audience of 60,000 plus. Congratulations on that. It's amazing in a short period of time. What do you think was the key kind of tactic to building that?
I honestly don't. My head of content here would be horrified for me to say this, but I don't think I really know. The Nudge Group followers grew so quickly. It was unbelievable. And Balance the Grind has, I've got theories on why both of those have big audiences. And again, I do think we lucked in. I do think that the pandemic and people locked at home, stuck on their computer screens, looking for something different. And we did try and look different, and we do always try and look different to what other people in our space are doing. Means people are more inclined to click that follow button. And as long as you're keeping that quality of content up, they're not going to leave. But
how are they discovering you?
I think with Nudge, they discovered us because I went out of my way to judge events, to speak on podcasts, to do the research, to really put myself out there as much as I could. And it's funny, I spent the first year and a half pushing myself and Nudge out there, and now I'm trying to spend time pushing everyone else out there so that Nudge doesn't just become me, it becomes Nudge. So we've got all these other staff. We're trying to now promote them because I think everyone's sick of seeing me. With Balance the Grind, Balance the Grind is a work-life balance website. So it has interviews of people and how they live their work and like a life. And there's about 2,000 interviews on there. We release one a day. It's very tied into Nudge, but I think people found that, what we've discovered is people found that trying to validate themselves. And that's why that audience went through the roof. You've got this world where everyone's changed the way they're living, whether it be hybrid, remote, traveling around the world whilst they work, all these kinds of things. And as we're now getting back to what could be considered a normal kind of environment again, where there's freedom and you can kind of choose how you do it, people are going, oh, am I actually allowed to live like this? Can I be successful? Because I quite like this new life that I've created, but I'm not sure if it's okay. How can I check it's okay? And they're searching things like that on Google, and they're finding us on Google. They are literally finding us on Google, which is incredible.
Wow.
I know, and without any SEO thought or anything like that. And this is another one of those serendipitous moments, and Balance the Grind has become the number one lead generator for Nudge, in that we are interviewing people every day. And they see the association, and they're often startup founders. It's probably 80% of them are startup founders. And they say, oh, I wouldn't mind learning more about Nudge. And I reckon Balance the Grind produces 10 to 15 leads a week for Nudge, probably 30 new clients a month. I probably meet 50 founders a month, all off the back of that. And again, we never bought it for that reason. That wasn't the thinking. It was going to be a completely separate business. But it's just happened and evolved that way.
Yeah, how cool. But that's kind of where Google and SEO and stuff has been going the past few years, that the intentional sort of like SEO tactic of sitting down and just pumping out pages with keywords in it doesn't work anymore. Google knows, it sees through that now. But if you are genuinely creating something which is useful and interesting to your target audience, then you're going to become discoverable. And particularly that daily factor, like that consistency of production and the momentum, I think would actually have a big impact.
Yeah, I think maybe consistency, like the TV show once a week, the interviews once a day, and we consistently do that. There's always there would be at least 5 pieces of content outside of those 2 mediums that also go out every week. Wow. So I guess that takes time and it builds. If anyone at Google wants to do a study on me, then that's fine. Just give me a call.
Hopefully they're listening to Weird Growth. And so you create content, you're sharing on LinkedIn, I assume, Twitter, YouTube, and so you're tapping into all of those networks as well.
We haven't tapped into Twitter yet. It's very high touch, and we just don't have the manpower. We do Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and a few other publications here and there. And obviously Balance the Grind itself now as well, as we're building a subscriber list there. And we're sort of building lists everywhere. One of the things that we're doing for startups now, like I said, I'm meeting 5 to 10 startups a week, right? And the first question I ask them is, what's the main thing you try to do? Probably 8 out of 10 of them, it's raising money, regardless of what phase they're at. And so we started out by me introducing them to a lot of VC funds and private equity funds and accelerators, which I'd spent a lot of time building contacts with in the very early years, because I saw it as a way to accelerate the growth in the business, which worked. But they're always looking for deals. They're always looking for deal flow. So we said, well, we're meeting all these founders. We should start introducing them. But it got to a point where I was spending so much time introducing people to people. I wasn't doing anything. So what we do now is we've got this investor newsletter that we send out to investors, and people can subscribe to that. Anyone can subscribe to it. And we've got angel investors, VCs, private equities, all sorts on there. And everybody that I meet throughout a month who's interested sends me their slide deck. We do a little blurb on them, and we send that out once a month, and they just get in contact directly. We don't monetize it or anything like that. It's just sort of a free service. And the investors love it, and the startup founders love it. And of course, what happens is they come together, they give them some money, and then hopefully they come back and hire 150 people through us. And that's a bit of a slide comment, but it does tend to work like that. Yeah, and it's funny. Like, we are super involved in our community here in Western Australia, at least, and much the same. We just try to be around the scene, and the way I say it is be everywhere. We'll be everywhere. Yeah. So go to the events. Be part of the community, and it's not just because we're trying to generate leads, because actually we really love it, and there's great people, and we enjoy that part of it. And the byproduct is that our brand and our expertise is recognised, and when people are ready, then
they approach us. But even as a marketing agency, you know, we're not spending money on traditional like lead gen advertising because this is so much more effective. People are coming to us already understanding what we're all about, and already bought in. They've already made a decision more or less to work with us because
I agree.
We've invested that time and effort into that.
I have a name for it. I call it the karma circle.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, you know, I don't ever sell. I meet founders who ask to meet, and we ask them what they're trying to achieve, and whatever it is they're trying to achieve, we help them do that. If it's investors, it's investors. If it's PR, we might put them on the show. If they're doing an ESOP, we might introduce them to some lawyers. Whatever it is, there's no selling. And the upside of all of those things that we help them do ultimately means at some point they come back and they hire from us. And it's the karma circle, and it's the best thing in the world, because no longer do you have to go out and sell your services. All you have to do go out is offer people help, which is a really nice thing to do. And then the work just sort of flows in off the back end. It's like a magical karma circle. And that's how I started to... I've coined that phrase internally now, and no one else still uses it. I'm going to get them all onto it, but right now that's what I'm calling it.
Love it. Well, we're very similar actually, Steve. It's amazing. But we call it like, it's either a flywheel. So it's like, be helpful, you know, have examples of things where clients have approached us and we've been helpful and got results. Then we can share the results and what we've learned from that. And then more people will approach us, then we can be helpful again. And that's kind of like a bit of a flywheel.
That's it.
Or it's in a way like when we apply the marketing metrics kind of theories to it, it's a bit more of a dark funnel because we don't actually know. We can't actually prove how many of those are necessarily going to convert into customers. No. We just know that the more people that we do help, the more opportunities are going to come our way, and it'll be a bit of a snowball effect that way as well. So you just got to trust the system.
Call it a dark karma funnel.
A dark karma funnel. Don't know how appealing that is, but
yeah. I'm saying it out loud. It's not sounding as good as it did in my head. I get that a lot.
Fantastic. What game-changing trends are you seeing at the moment amongst founders that you interview and work with?
There's in terms of trends, there's a massive push towards the gamifying of everything. I think that's the biggest thing. You know, finally seeing a slowly decline in the amount of fintechs that are appearing, thank goodness, because there's way too many.
I bet in Sydney too, yeah.
There's a lot more consumer companies, particularly in Australia, which is really interesting. You know, there hasn't been a huge amount of consumer startups in Australia because there's not that many consumers in the country. But there's a far greater focus on that. That's really exciting. I like that. I like consumer startups.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely the gamification, you know, whether it be the play to earn space where people in the Philippines are having an opportunity to earn a second income through playing games rather than working in an unsafe environment, and people are, you know, enabling that through a variety of different platforms. Obviously, crypto's going through the roof. We touched on Meta earlier. I think it's still a bit early for all the Meta startups, but those are probably the biggest changes. It's people making a game out of something to make it more engaging, particularly with all the remote stuff that's going on, and trying to make sure people are remaining connected in some way.
Yeah, amazing. I guess, you know, to cut through just the clutter and the myriad of options that people have to do with their time during the day, if you can really engage them in an addictive sort of thing which keeps them coming back, I suppose, for gamification, super powerful. What does it take to find the right people for a startup? You know, we sort of talk about you know, culture fit or skills, or like, what's the secret weapon for founders that they need to find the right person for their startup?
I think the biggest mistakes we see are hiring the wrong person at the wrong stage. So if you take a traditional venture journey, you know, pre-seed, seed, series A, B, C, D, so far IPO, each one of those stages, there are different kinds of individuals you're hiring. And we'll see people go and hire a sales manager from Salesforce when they're at a seed stage, right? That's not going to work. The guy doesn't know how to sell without a logo behind him. He doesn't know how to build things from scratch because everything's already done for him. So I think, you know, on both sides, on both the founder side and the candidate side, it's a lack of understanding of, you know, if you're coming in at this stage, you've got to love ambiguity. You've got to love wanting to get involved in everything. If you're coming in at this stage and you love getting involved in everything, you're going to annoy everyone because now we're getting into more of a specialist stage. So that's probably the most important part than anything. It's not so much the culture, because the culture will embody the person, I think, if they believe in the startup, but it's the skill set to match where they are on the venture journey.
Yep.
And making sure that there are some people who can transition across those different venture journeys. A lot of people are great at early stage, but they're terrible at Series B, C, which is why you see people leaving great businesses like Canva and Atlassian, because they hit a point where they don't like it. But you do need some people who can go on that whole journey, and they're very difficult to find. And it's quite difficult to sort of tease that out. You can do situational questioning and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the obvious thing is to find someone who's done it before, because then you've kind of got to prove it. But that's probably the most important thing, I would say, that people get wrong without realizing.
And obviously, so many, such a big conversation at the moment about skills, particularly in Australia. And you're probably sick of talking about it, but
never.
With this sort of skills shortage, or flight of talent to overseas or whatever else, and then the remote working stuff. So, what can founders do at the moment to reach the best people that they need for the stage that they're at the moment?
So I think there's a bit of a misconception. There is a skills shortage, but there's also a skills oversupply. So, and it's very much seniority. If you look at the space for senior roles, so I guess if you're talking an early stage startup, it might be a head of marketing or a head of product or a head of sales, and those kinds of roles upwards, there's a massive oversupply of candidates, enormous, and you can get whatever you want. And there's actually huge amounts of those people coming back into the country rather than leaving. So I think people think that but where there's undersupply is anyone underneath that doing all the work. And unfortunately, typical pyramid works like that, and unfortunately it's looking like that at the moment. So and I think the reason of that is actually demographics more than anything else. You've kind of got baby boomers, Generation X's and Generation Y's all looking at this tiny little section at the top, because that's where they feel they should be. Baby boomers have been there before, X's were typically there, and Y's are now stepping into those roles, particularly in the startup and scale-up sector, which leaves just poor old Generation Z to do everything else. And most of them are riding around doing deliveries. So there's just no one there to do the job. And without the influx of people from overseas, from South America and Europe and the UK and the US, it's the problem's just going to keep accentuating, because it's such an age-driven thing. It's not going to correct at any time. And what can you do? It's a really good question. I think all you can do is offer the flexibility. I think if I look at people and what they want, they're not asking us, what's the opportunity for training? How am I going to get to my next role? What's the salary? The number one question is flexibility. If you want people to go in 5 days a week to your office in the western suburbs, people are going to leave. If you're willing to offer flexibility in terms of remote and hybrid, that's great. If you're going to force everyone to go remote, you're also going to lose people. So there isn't a one answer. I think it's being able to create an environment where whatever works for that individual works for you as well, and making sure that they can change that. People have kids, for example, when they're very young, they might want to be at home less, but then they might want to be at home more when they're slightly older. So what they're doing, and school terms can change things. What they want this school term might be different next school term. Someone's at university studying, same thing. Their sort of activities outside of work will change. So it's being able to offer them the ability to work in a way that matches their life as their life changes. If you can do that, you're going to have a far greater chance of attracting people. And not a lot of people are they say they are, but they're not really. There's often quite a lot of constraints around there, flexible.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's going to require a massive shift in the way that business owners think.
It's hard too. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. But if you want the people, that's what you've got to do. Everyone says, we'll do anything to get the right people. Well, that's kind of what you want to do. It's kind of what you got to do, as hard as it is. And it's hard to get it right. You just got to keep changing and iterating, just like you do with your product that you're building. You've got to get it right. You've got to get the market fit right. This is the same thing for your employees.
We had early work on the podcast a few episodes ago. So, like a community of quite early stage career, people quite early on in their career in their 20s. And just really fascinating to see how engaged they are and motivated to both build that community. And a lot of them are working remote for tech and startup type businesses. And I just think that the attitude of the way that they're thinking about their careers is super interesting, and it's like chalk and cheese to the generation before them as well.
So much. And they want to go, I've had guys move out to the country. I've got people move to Newcastle, like people move to sort of regional areas. I've had people go and work in Doha for 2 months because they want to. If you can support them to do that, you're going to retain them, and they're going to give that back to you. Whereas I think a lot of people, particularly maybe of my vintage, and I've never agreed with this, but there are a lot of people believe that as soon as they're not doing anything, they're just taking the mickey out of you. That's just so not how they think. That might be how you think if you're in that scenario because you never had that opportunity, but they don't think like that. And you've got to believe and trust them. And if you do that, you'll not only retain them, they will tell their friends, and their friends will see that, and you will attract more.
Yep, bang on. What could possibly be next for the future for you and for...
I thought you were going to say, what could possibly go wrong?
Well, actually, what could go wrong in that space?
So
It's probably just going back to what could go wrong with the whole remote work stuff. Like, there are a couple of fringe stories about programmers in the US who are like competing amongst themselves for how many jobs they can be working in concurrently. And, one guy reckons he was working for 10 different tech companies and bringing in $1.5 million in salary all at once.
But you know what? Those stories have been around as long as I can remember. They're just being picked up on now by the media because it works and it's selling. I think there's always going to be an element that are going to do things like that. There's always going to be an element that look for the angle and look for ways of shortcutting. But as a general rule, I just don't think most people are like that at all.
I think you're right. And especially the other thing you said there is, I think most people are probably, on balance, more motivated by having a great lifestyle and working in a job which they enjoy and wake up in the morning and look forward to going and engaging in, than just the dollar figure that they get in their salary.
Well, you probably saw this when you saw the early work guys. It's not just motivated; they're almost demanding it. Right. They feel that they should be able to do this, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. All the technology is there. All you need is the trust. And look, there's always going to be some people that will abuse that, but then there's some people that abuse the normal way of working as well. So I think you've just got to kind of embrace it and try and find the good ones.
Yeah, that's
why we're here.
That's why you're here. So the question I did ask was, what could possibly be next for the future for Nexus and for you?
The interesting thing, I think, right now is there's a lot of talk about pullback on funding for the startup sector. There was a couple of interesting articles. I don't think there's going to be so much a pullback on funding in total. I think there's going to be a pullback on funding new companies. An enormous amount, unprecedented amount of companies got funded in the last couple of years, right? Perhaps quite a few that shouldn't, in some of my opinions. But I think what you're going to see now is the money's not drying up. It's not that they're not raising money, it's not they're not deploying money. What you're going to see is them deploying more money into the companies that are already into the system. Okay. If you look at the Australian ecosystem I'm talking about here, because it's very different in the US, UK, and even Asia. If you look at the Australian ecosystem, there's a huge amount of companies sitting in that seed to Series A. And there's not that many Series B, C, Ds, and Es, right? There's a few, but there's not many. And we probably could name them all. So what you're going to see is that investment going into this. You're going to see whether or not these companies can actually make it and can actually get to that next level and achieve their global domination that most of them seem to be aiming for, or whatever it is that they're going for. And that's quite a different market to what we've seen. And I think it's quite exciting because we've just seen a frenzy of companies popping up everywhere and founders who were never dreaming of being founders and founders who were forced into founders through situations. So I think you're going to see a shift and you're going to see companies... quite a few startup companies not disappearing, but perhaps not growing, and other ones really coming up and floating to the top, if you like.
So what you're saying is that we're likely to see a smaller number of bigger companies being funded, so more Canvas and more Atlassians and that sort of thing in Australia potentially.
Maybe not the Canvas and Atlassians. Well, it would be good to see more of those, but I think you're going to see a far more mature ecosystem here, probably more in line with where the UK is. The UK has that, but it's got a much greater amount of companies that are Series A and above, and here it's still young. And I think COVID has really injected into this system, and I don't think it's going to go away, but I think we're just going to see more success stories. Yep. I'm excited about that, and probably less just another one.
Yeah,
it's a little less of that.
No, that's great. Very exciting. One big piece of advice that you have for founders who are looking to grow, I'm sure you have plenty, but is there one sort of thing that you have?
In terms of, if you liken it to growth, probably, and this is the opposite of what everyone else seems to be saying, I think everyone needs to just slow down a tiny bit. I think there's too much growth for growth and not enough thoughtful growth. I don't think you should stop growing, and I don't think you should stop trying to hit that new ARR target so you can get your next round of funding. But I also don't think you should do it at all costs. And I think there's some crazy hiring going on that doesn't need to happen. There really is growth for growth's sake. And I think there needs to be a little bit more business principles brought into this rather than just blind growth. That's probably my best piece of advice.
I love a bit of contrarian opinion. That's awesome. And I think it's going to be seen to be cool to bootstrap again. I hope so.
Yeah.
I think that is the coolest thing that you can do, as opposed to just going out and raising a whole chunk of change. But like actually demonstrating that you have genuine cash flow and customers and people that love your product. I think that's sort of going to be the thing which people really value.
Do you know what? I'm loving these new revenue funding that I'm seeing come out. You know, companies like Fundable who are saying, right, we can see your future revenue. You've got recurring revenue. We can see the future. We'll give you a loan off that because we know it's coming in, and that will enable you to grow quicker, but we're not taking any equity. I think more products like that, where founders aren't just chucking out equity left, right, and center. Like you said, it's still bootstrapping because they are paying interest on that. But I think things like that will bring in more robust business practices as well, because they've got to pay the money back as opposed to just blowing someone else's money, and it doesn't matter if they have to pay it back or not. Hopefully they'll get some sort of liquidity event one day. This is slightly different. You actually have to think more about the profitability, not necessarily in the short term, but in the long term.
It's the one thing about services businesses, isn't it? You've always got wages to pay. And
so many wages.
To bring it back to bring it back full circle with the conversation. But, you know, I've run a services business for 8 years, and, you know, you're always just focused on cash flow, and, you know, whereas I guess the flip side is you can go raise $1 million and have a runway for 2.5 years and feel comfortable, but it doesn't keep pressure on to build a genuinely profitable business.
It's someone asked me the other day, in fact I get asked this a lot, what's the difference between a startup and a scale-up? And my answer to that question is when you no longer have a runway. So a runway is you've got a finite amount of time before your money runs out. When you've raised that much money that the runway is so far ahead, it doesn't really matter. That's when you become a scale-up. But I also think that's when a lot of mistakes get made. And I think the ones that, like the Atlassians and the Canvas, they kept raising money for sure, but they spent it very wisely. And I think a lot of people get to that scale-up phase without necessarily the business understanding or experience to know how to spend that money well, and they get slightly inflated egos and don't think they need that help, and then it all goes terribly wrong.
Well, Steve, we're getting to the end of the episode, so show and tell time.
What's
one favourite tool, device, toy, thing that in your life that makes your life better that you're loving at the moment?
So this was such a difficult question. I was thought about this because I don't get gadgets or toys. I don't know why. Maybe I used to. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's two things in my life that I think have changed my life. I'm an original watch person. I like watches. I love watches. But I did go and fall down the trap, and I bought one of these Apple Watches. But I only wear it for very specific things. So I wear it when I go walking with the dog, or if I'm going exercising, cycling, biking, you know, kiteboarding, whatever it is. So that was great because that enabled me to actually monitor what I was doing. But that's not really a thing. I think the thing that's changed my life the best, that's not expensive, because those are quite expensive, I found it when I bought one. SodaStream. I know I saw it earlier. I love sparkling water, and sparkling water is outrageously expensive, right? Outrageously expensive. So having a SodaStream and just drinking fizzy water all day, I find I get more energy, and I don't know why, out of fizzy water than I do out of coffee or normal water. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the bubbles, but it definitely lifts me up and gets me going. So that's probably the biggest thing. I've had it about a year now, and I still probably 2 bottles a day.
Yeah, me too. I've probably had it probably 2 years, and I think it suppresses my appetite a little bit as well.
Oh, it does, 100%. Yes, it does. That is the bubbles. Definitely, it fills up your stomach, I think.
Yeah, I think the Israelis actually have a word for it in Hebrew. It's like sort of like a filled tummy with bubbles.
I'm going to look that up. We should look that up and start a company called whatever that Hebrew name is. Not sure what it's going to do. Into
competition. And like there's some real designer like competitors to SodaStream as well. I understand there's like some which sort of $500 or $600 just for their little unit. I've got some mates who splurged down on that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be cheap. But I eat sort of just in an 8-hour window, so I've just done just into my habit the sort of the periodic fasting, and this really helps me if I'm a little bit peckish. It just helps me get through to that lunchtime.
So I do that for 3 days a week. I do intermittent fasting, and I'm the same. I just drink fizzy water because it definitely, I don't know, it does seem to. Because otherwise, I literally by 11 o'clock I'm feeling like my stomach's eating me alive, and I want food. But the sparkling water does it.
So do you actually not eat for 3 whole days a week? Is that what you do?
No, God.
You just don't have breakfast at 3 days a week?
I don't eat from 7 o'clock at night until midday, 3 times a week. So I don't, but I love I tend to eat breakfast on the days that I train. So if I'm going to do training, I will eat breakfast because I feel I need the energy. But on the days I'm not training, I'll skip breakfast through to lunch.
And I hear you're big into swimming too.
Big into swimming. Well, I'm not sure how I look. I think I look like I'm drowning, but I'm lucky. I'm lucky in where I live that I'm right on the harbour.
Wow!
So I can be 30 seconds. I can be swimming down at Parsley Bay, which is awesome. And again, like the fizzy water, it wakes you up if you're tired or if your head's cleared. I might only swim for half an hour, but and I actually quite like doing it in the winter. The cold water, as much as the shock to your body is terrible. And I think the hardest part is that you're not supposed to have a shower when you get back, and it's your body getting its core temperature back up. That's really good for your circulatory system. Okay. Yeah. But I sit here sometimes shivering for 2 hours before my body gets back. But yeah, there's a weird twisted thing that I do like about that, and I like the kiteboarding that goes alongside it. I like water stuff.
Magic. What's it like swimming in the Sydney Harbour? Is it choppy and salty, or is it reasonably?
Not where I do it. Because I'm harbour side, and Parsley Bay is a very protected bay. There's a shark net, which is one good thing. But
I was going to ask about sharks.
It can be choppy, but it's got to be pretty rough. It's got to be like hammering down. I do sometimes swim when it's hammering down, but I tend to be a bit more of a fair weather swimmer, and then I can head off to the gym when it's raining really bad.
We had David Cannington, who is the co-founder of New Hero, which is a hearing earphones based out of here at Perth, and he is a very avid swimmer as well. And when he lived in San Francisco, we'd go swimming in the bay on a daily basis.
That's impressive.
He's a machine, but he reckons he just plods along and he's pretty slow compared to everyone else. But yeah, I very much admire people who do that as part of their daily routine.
I'm the same. I plod along. I'm not trying to break any records. It's just, and you know what? It's the one place no one can get you because you can't. You have no phone, right? There's no way. There's no children. There's no family. There's no clients. There's nothing. No dog. Leave the dog. Like, you're safe. Even the dog that keeps barking during this interview. It's the one place where you can truly be alone in your own thoughts for a while.
Harold Holt found that out too, didn't he?
He certainly did.
Steve, thank you so much. What's your final plug or ask? What can people do if they're interested in finding out more about Nudge or your other podcast?
Look, I think go and have a look at some of the content and tell me what you think. Tell me some ideas. I think we're always looking for ways to refresh it, and it's always hard to come up with ways to refresh content when you're doing it yourself and you're in the thick of it, right? So people from outside can often see ideas. Anyone's got any ideas on what we could do around the podcast and the TV show or anything in what we do with Balance the Grind or Nudge, just shoot me a message on LinkedIn. All
right. Great ask. That's and what URL should they, if they want to check out Balance the Grind?
It's balancethegrind.co.
Beautiful. That sounds great, mate.
It's a cool website, that. I love
the
look of that website. People just love that website.
Cool. We'll check it out and we'll put it in the show notes. Steve, thank you so much for being on Weird Growth. It was a really fun chat, and I think people will learn a lot from it. So thank you so much, mate. And thank you all for listening to Weird Growth. If you enjoyed the episode, please do subscribe on Apple Podcasts, follow us on YouTube, and leave a review. If you're listening on your mobile Spotify app, there's a new review feature, so we'd love you to drop a few stars in there and let us know what you think. But for now, that's it from Weird Growth. Thanks again, Steve. I'm Cam from Ammo. Bye-bye.
Thank you.